Hi everyone, this is a group 3 and today me and my fellow classmates will be presenting our final project, Canadian Gender Wage Gap Analysis by Province. First, let me introduce the group members. Arun Chatterjee, Gabriela Friere, Tanya Hamber, and myself, Clara Yijie Chao. Below is the agenda for today's presentation. First, we will introduce the context about what is gender wage gap and why we need to look into this issue. Second, Tanya and Arun will show you how they prepared the data in Jupyter Notebook and Tableau Prep and discuss wage gaps in details. And then Gabby will walk you through using visualized graphs prepared in Power BI to discuss further in terms of the progresses made by each province in Canada from 2000 to 2019 and how educational levels affected the gender wage gap in Canada. And then we will wrap up the presentation by presenting our findings and recommendations. Without further ado, let's get started. First, what is the gender wage gap? According to Canadian Human Rights Act, pay equity is considered as a protected human right. It is deemed as discriminatory practice to differently pay or value male and female employee who perform essentially the same work. In today's workplace, even though we might feel female and male employees have been treated equally, but in general, female employees are still being paid less than their male counterparts. The unequal pay will lead to low employee retention, employee lack of motivation, and low productivity, and will eventually slow down the economic growth and affect the social morality in general. In 2019, the female BBC presenter Samira Ahmad brought her case to court against the BBC for unequal pay based on gender. Samira was paid $465 per episode. Comparatively, her male counterpart Jeremy Wine has been paid €3,000 per episode. To put that in a simple math equation, that means it will take 6.5 Samiras to earn as much as her counterpart Jeremy does. In addition to that, according to Women at Work published by the International Labour Organization in 2016, globally, female employees are paid 23% less than their male counterparts. Now, give me your guess about how many years do you think it will take to close the gender wage gap at current speed? The answer is 70 years. Shocking, right? That actually means at current speed, it will take 2 generations workforce to close the gender wage gap. Therefore, we really would like to examine how Canada is doing regarding close the gender wage gap by provinces and how educational level might affect that. We use the dataset Wages by Education Level published by Government Canada to examine 2 questions. First, between 2000 and 2019, which provinces have most successfully narrowed down the pay gap between genders? Second, is there a relationship between this success and the levels of education? I will now pass it to my group member Tanya to talk about how we prepared the data.
Thanks, Tanya, and I'll be presenting the data preparation component of our study. Our dataset came from the Government of Canada website. I imported the single CSV file into Tableau Prep and started cleaning and preparing the data for eventual export to Jupyter Notebook and Power BI. The original set had 425,000 rows. There was a lot of overlapping data, so my first cleaning step was to filter out the overlap in the age, type of work, education, and geography categories. I also eliminated the years prior to 2000, so we would be working with a clean 20-year data set from 2000 to 2019. My second step was to create latitude and longitude coordinates in case we wanted to have a map visual. I copied the province category and labeled them latitude and longitude and replaced the province value in each with the corresponding provincial capital city GPS coordinates. The final cleaning step was to separate the qualitative values in the male and female columns according to the 5 different variables in the wages column. We decided we would potentially use 3 of these 5: median hourly wages, average hourly wages, and total number of employees. These 3 sets of data were now down to 5,400 rows each. I output them to CSV files and pass them on to our coder Arun and our visualizer Gabby. I'll now pass it over to my colleague Arun, who did the coding in Jupyter Notebook.
Thanks, Tanya. With Jupyter Notebook, my analysis is focused on the 3 questions that we are trying to answer. For my analysis, I imported 3 libraries. I used pandas for analyzing and matplotlib and seaborn for visualizations. I read the file using the read CSV function of pandas library. The output is a data frame, and I named it average wages. There are 10 variables in the data frame: year, latitude, and longitude of the capital city of the province, education level, type of work, age group, and the average hourly wage for males and females. Next, I created a new variable called pay gap, which is the difference between the hourly wage rate of men and women. And for further analysis, I only needed 4 columns, that is year, pay gap, geography, and education level. So I created a new data frame with these columns. I converted the year variable from integer to string because I wanted it to be categorical and not numerical. For our first question, that is to find the pay gap between men and women from 2000 to 2019, I grouped the data by the column year and used the mean function on the pay gap column. Next, I plotted the average pay gap from 2000 to 2019 using the bar plot method of the Seaborn library. To make it visually appealing, I used the predefined palette blues. By looking at the graph, we can tell that in 2000, the pay gap was around $4.09, and in 2020, it reduced to $3.09. A lot of fluctuation can be seen over the years. Therefore, we can't be certain that this drop in pay gap will remain consistent. Moving on to our second question, we are trying to analyze which provinces have been most successful in narrowing the gender wage gap since 2000. For this purpose, I grouped the data by year and by geography and used the mean function on the pay gap column. After which, I got the average pay gap of each province from 2000 to 2019. I used bar plots for visualizations for each province. So there are 10 plots showing the average pay gap from 2000 to 2019. By analyzing the bar plots, interestingly, we found that the pay gap for Prince Edward Island decreased significantly in 2005, 2013, and 2018, but it again increased in the following years. For our third question, we are trying to find if there's a relationship between a narrowing pay gap and levels of education. For this purpose, I grouped the data by education level and then by geography. The mean function was used on the pay gap column, after which I got the average pay gap in each province corresponding to education levels from the lowest to the highest. I represented the data using the bar plot and used a predefined palette for color. There are 10 plots, one for each province, and it is evident from the graphs that there is no direct relationship between education level and a reduced pay gap. For instance, when we look at the graph for Alberta, the pay gap is more in case of trade certificate or diploma than lower education levels. Similar observations can be derived from the other plots as well. This brings me to the end of my Jupyter Notebook presentation. Now I'll pass it to my colleague Gabriela, who will present the Power BI visualizations. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Gabriela Friere, and I will talk about the competitive analysis from our dataset and the cost-benefit analysis. Analyzing the data from 1999 to 2019, we can see that overall, there is a narrowing of 3.5% in the gender wage gap within Canada as a whole. However, when we look at the individual categories, such as age and provinces, we see that there is still a long way to go. On average, between the ages of 25 and 54 years old, with full-time employment, female employees in Canada are still paid 12.23% less, that means about $6.90, than a male employee. The top provinces that were successful narrowing the gender wage gap were New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Manitoba. They not only have the lowest gap between female and male in terms of wages hourly, they also were the best at decreasing their gap in the last 20 years. New Brunswick decreased their gender wage gap by $3.53, Prince Edward Island decreased by 86 cents, and Manitoba decreased the gap by 85 cents. The three provinces that rate in the bottom were Alberta, with a difference of $5.92 between female and male wages hourly, Newfoundland and Labrador with a difference of $6.60, and Nova Scotia with a difference of $5.16. And these were all the data from 2019. Out of the 10 provinces that we investigated, that we analyzed, we noticed that 6 of them actually increased their gap in 2019. Newfoundland, for example, increased their gap by impressive $2.61, as you can see here. Quebec is also worth mentioning because they are also a province that increased their gap by 65 cents. When it comes to the level of education, we can see that it affects directly on the hourly wage on both male and female. As you can see here, the education level for female and male in Canada. On average, females invest more in post-secondary courses such as community college certificates and bachelor degrees. Males have higher numbers on high school graduate and trade. The data also shows the disparity in wages when it comes to the level of education. For Canada overall, women holding bachelor degrees will receive an hourly wage equivalent to a male that has a trade certificate. And women with community college will actually learn less than a male that has unfinished high school graduation. Here we see the education level scenario in Manitoba, which is one of our top provinces. Okay, so you see here the data from 1999 and the data here from 2019. So following the trend that we see overall in Canada, the female workers invest heavily on bachelor degree and community college. As you can see here, there was a big disparity from 20 years. And we even see an increase, a considerable increase on the above bachelor as well. Women are now surpassing men. It's interesting, however, when we check the data in Newfoundland, which is one of the provinces that need improvement. So what we see is that the trend is the same. We still see women investing on a bachelor degree and community college, and we also see a difference in the above bachelor degree. But that didn't change the gap in their hourly wage. They still earn less than men, considerably. We all understand that closing the gender wage gap is important, but what does that mean? How will this impact the society as a whole? Women are responsible for 70% of the world's consumption. If they have access to a higher earning power, they will likely cause a direct boost in the economy. We can also create a more inclusive and diversified working environment. Canada is one of the most diverse countries in the world. Promoting inclusiveness when it comes to gender will most likely increase higher employee retention and work productivity. Closing the gender wage gap will also encourage women to enter historically male-dominated fields, such as science, technology, and engineering.
Abby, hello again. It's Tanya to walk you through our conclusions and recommendations. We identified Manitoba, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island as the most successful in narrowing their gender wage gap over the past 20 years. Education levels increased across all Canadian provinces during the same 20 years. In most provinces, more women actually attain higher levels of education than men. We concluded that although it's great to see levels of education increasing across the Canadian population, there was not a direct relationship between education and the narrowing of the gender pay gap. In recommendations, we did a little further digging to see what the world's most gender equal countries were doing to narrow their pay gaps. Scandinavian countries are actively addressing the gender wage gap with strategies such as wage audits, publicly publishing wage data, and requiring a gender pay equity action plan for companies where a pay gap exists. Our first recommendation is the implementation of the Pay Equity Act. It's a step toward narrowing gender pay gaps in federally regulated workplaces. Secondly, to further narrow the pay equity gap, Canada needs to engage the private sector of small businesses that employ 69% of Canada's working population. following the examples of Scandinavian countries and phasing in strategies like wage audits, publication of wage data, and gender pay equity action plans for medium and small-sized Canadian employers, especially in Canada's largest provinces, that showed the least amount of progress over the past 20 years, will improve gender pay equity in Canada as a whole. We hope you enjoyed our study findings. Thanks so much for listening.